It began as a hostile mother and son relationship.
I ain't no damn kid anymore!
Then act like a man!
They had some terrible fights, and it was awful. My words to my grandmother was, "He's probably going to kill you."
That ominous premonition came true the day Tracy Beatty strangled his mother to death.
She's always a bitch when nobody else was around.
You just called her a bitch.
I want to find out what could drive a man to kill the woman who'd given him life. I'm Dr. Michelle Ward, and I'm a criminal psychologist and trial consultant. I've researched hundreds of murder cases, determined to find out what drives people to kill. But no amount of research beats meeting a killer face to face. Using techniques I've honed through my career, I'm going to take you inside the mind of a murderer. In 2003, 62-year-old Callie Click lived alone in White House, Texas, but had lots of neighborhood friends.
These are for you. Oh, they're beautiful. Okay, come on, let's have some coffee.
Her granddaughter says she lit up the room.
She always had a twinkle in her eye. She always read the Bible, and she believed a lot in God. And she just was a pretty amazing person.
At the age of 19, Callie had one son, Tracy Beatty, and worked hard to raise him on her own.
My grandmother was a single mother, and she worked 2 jobs, and she did everything that she could to make ends meet.
From birth, Beatty was a difficult child, and things only got worse as he grew up.
This is the 3rd fight you've been in this week. You should know better than this.
Leave me alone!
I will not leave you alone. Can't come and go as you please.
I ain't no damn kid anymore!
It was awful.
I told you no!
The whole neighborhood heard. It was just a powder keg.
Drink it. You cannot take my car.
But no matter how hard they fought, Tracy was Callie's only child, and despite warnings from loved ones, she refused to give up on him.
She loved him no matter what, and she forgave him for everything that he had ever done. I didn't feel like it was dangerous. I just felt like it was hopeless. I never dreamed that it was going to go as far as it did.
But on November 25th, 2003, everyone's worst fears came true when a raging fight between mother and son ended with 42-year-old Tracy Beatty strangling Callie to death in her own home. He was convicted of capital murder in 2004 and sentenced to die. I'm on my way to Texas death row to interview Tracy Beatty. From what I've learned, this is the kind of guy who has never been able to control his impulses and urges, and he responds to every situation the exact same way, with violence and aggression. I mean, this guy strangled his own mother. Tracy Trey Beatty, inmate number 999484, has been on death row for 10 years. During my case research, I learned that Beatty's last state appeal was denied. I'm hoping he'll be more honest about his crime, knowing he will never leave prison alive. We're allowed only 30 minutes for setup, and I'm given just 1 hour for the interview, so I've got to work fast.
Hi, Mr. Beatty. I'm Dr. Michelle Ward. How are you feeling today?
Well,
Okay.
Right away, I notice that he has a nervous twitch. In fact, his whole demeanor is cagey and restless. I can also see that his arm is covered in an angry red rash.
I see you're bleeding a little bit. Are you okay?
they say I got some kind of fungus growing on my skin right now.
It looks really uncomfortable.
It's not. Itchy a little bit.
I'm going to have to tread carefully because he seems unpredictable and impulsive. If he gets agitated, he could stop this interview instantly.
Why did you want to do this interview?
Man, I'm getting close to my execution date.
Are you scared?
I'm tired of being locked up like an animal.
According to recent studies, less than 2% of the roughly 170,000 convicted murderers in U.S. state prisons today have killed a parent.
One at a time.
Yeah, I think the rest of
It's chilling to think I'm sitting right across from one of them. I'm glad for this protective glass between us.
When you were strangling your mom, at any point where you're like, oh my God, this is my mother?
No, not. I was still pissed off. She was still a bitch.
Beatty's voice is devoid of emotion. He's not expressing any regrets or remorse. Those rare killers who murder their mothers often have one of the following in common. Many suffer from mental illness, others were once abused by their mothers, or there is money to be gained from the crime. From my research, it doesn't seem like Beatty falls into any of these categories.
My goal is to understand how you ended up here, but in order to do that, it's best for me to start at the beginning and ask you some questions about your childhood. Has anybody in your family ever been in prison?
My grandfather's brother.
Was it a violent offense?
No, yeah. He raped his own daughter.
He raped his own daughter? Yeah, that's pretty violent.
The fact that his uncle also committed such a brutal crime against an immediate family member suggests a genetic predisposition to violence in his family.
How about your father?
I've never met him.
I tried to dig up information about Beatty's father, but there's no trace of him, and Callie never spoke of him to friends or family. It makes me wonder if his father was a violent, angry man, too.
Did you feel like you were violent growing up?
I got a lot of fight.
You need to change your behavior. This has got to stop.
Well, he started it.
Tell me about your relationship with your mother when you were a child.
My mother was a control freak. She wanted to control everything I did. And I was one of them unruly little bastards that wouldn't be controlled. I mean, all you got to do is look at the woman in the background and see that she was a bitch. Nobody could put up with it for a long period of time.
No, and you just called her a bitch.
She was always a bitch when nobody else was around. The woman that I knew wasn't always the one that was seen in public. She'd act two different ways. She'd act like a nice grandmotherly type in public, and then be a bitch when we got home. That's why we never got along.
As a mother, it was Callie's job to discipline Beatty, but when she did, he'd lash out in a rage. It's clear that he struggles to express himself even when he's not upset. So I can imagine that in a moment of anger, that frustration would boil over into a rage, just like a small child throwing a tantrum.
Leave me alone!
Beatty tells me by the time he was an adolescent, he was doing serious drugs.
I was all right until the 8th grade or something, then I started getting into all kinds of trouble.
Is that when you began doing drugs and drinking?
Yeah.
So what were your drugs of choice?
Methamphetamine.
Even in 8th grade?
No, I just wanted to get high.
Beatty was already a rageful, maladapted kid, and meth is a drug that can alter the normal function of the limbic system. That's a part of the brain that processes emotion like anger. So the meth was amplifying and distorting the hostility he already felt. Beatty tells me he dropped out of high school at 16. And 2 years later, he had his first serious arrest.
Tell me about the first time.
When I was 18.
And that was for?
DWI, an evading arrest.
You ran or you drove?
I drove. They said I tried to outrun the cop, but I didn't. They come up behind me and ran the back into the car, and I pulled over.
Beatty was arrested and fined. The first in a series of arrests for minor offenses that would span the next few years. Meanwhile, Beatty made some efforts to land on his feet and rein in his bad behavior. Around this time, he decided he couldn't stand to be around his mother anymore because she drove him crazy. So he moved out of the house and cut off all contact with her. He went to trade school and became an electrician. When he was 19, Beatty met his wife-to-be Dolores through a mutual friend.
My mother was 17 years old, so it was her first love. She had the gorgeous blue eyes that anybody could ever see. And, I mean, he was a very good-looking man. I know that she was completely in love with him.
After just a few months of dating, they got married and soon had 2 children.
He had a couple of daughters.
Tiffany and Tim.
How did you feel about them?
Oh, they're good kids, man. They don't bother nobody.
Did you love them?
Yeah.
He says he loved his girls, but he has no expression and a flat affect. He seems very emotionally stunted. I think Beatty is only capable of feeling and expressing himself one way, through violence. And in fact, my research revealed horrifying allegations that he abused his daughters.
How did you treat them when you were around them? Were you good to your kids, or?
I don't believe it's what I think a kid was the other way. Just for the children.
So you didn't hit them?
No.
I had read that you had put cigarettes out on one of your daughters.
No.
But Tamara says her father's lying.
My aunt had said that I was in my crib one day and I had soiled my pants, and he proceeded to pick me up and slap me because I had dirtied my diaper. He did put a cigarette out on me as well.
Tamara was too young to remember and only found out about her father's abuse from other family members years later. Her mother never said a word about it. I suspect Beatty was violent with her too, and like many abused women, she chose to suffer in silence.
Well, the one thing about my grandmother and my mother is neither one of them throughout my entire life or childhood, or even to this day for my mother, ever spoke an ill word about my father, regardless of what the circumstances were at that time.
But not only did he harm his own daughters, his cruel and violent behavior was directed toward everyone who crossed his path. And it was only a matter of time before it turned lethal. Death row inmate Tracy Beatty murdered his mother with his bare hands on November 25th, 2003. He was a violent and angry man who made a habit of lashing out to those closest to him. Now I've learned through court records that his 2 baby daughters weren't the only children he tortured. In 1984, Beatty almost killed his 18-month-old niece.
Tell me about that.
I had 2 lamp cords. She kept going over there and grabbing it and pulling it back and forth, listening to the little chain rattle. After telling her 4 or 5 times, she didn't want to learn the easy ways, so I'd sit there with it. The next time she came back to do it again, she pulled the wires up against her stomach, and they touched each other and just arced.
I don't think that's the truth. I think he's lying about that. He was watching her and he electrocuted my cousin with an extension cord, at which point she almost died.
I don't think Beatty necessarily got pleasure out of hurting his niece. I think he just hurts anyone who irritates him. But even now, decades later, he can't admit what he did.
But you didn't do that?
No, I was responsible for it. I was babysitter.
But it wasn't from you?
No, it wasn't from me.
Beatty's personal history suggests he has almost no empathy or emotional attachment. He even lacks the instinct to protect his own family. Instead, he targets them for violence, especially if they're weak and vulnerable. After he electrocuted his niece, Child Protective Services got involved, and they gave Beatty's wife, Dolores, an ultimatum.
CPS came in and they told my mother that she either had to leave him or she was going to lose her children. She chose her children.
Dolores filed for divorce right away, after less than 5 years of marriage.
He was pretty abusive to her as well. It was probably a door that she was waiting for God to open.
Beatty was convicted of seriously injuring his niece and sentenced to 4 years in prison. He was released early on probation.
Back then, it was overcrowded, and they were letting people out early. You come down with a 15-year sentence, and you didn't do it like 4.5 years.
Oh, I see. I see.
But in 1988, after more than a half dozen incidents with authorities, 27-year-old Beatty was busted for auto theft. And this time, he served almost 5 years in prison. When he got out of jail, Beatty had no money, no job, and no place to live. So he moved back home, the only place in the world where he was still welcome.
Tell me about that.
Everything was going fine, and she wouldn't bother me, She'd leave me alone.
At first, Beatty kept busy doing odd jobs in town. But what little money he made, he spent going out at night and drinking. And this behavior didn't sit well with his mother. Before long, it was the source of their constant arguments.
Stop stumbling home drunk.
I can do what I want.
It's still the same thing. The same combative relationship now. Me and her just couldn't get along.
Were you starting the fights?
Not really. Well, she was pissed off. Told me, you ain't changed, dog. You're still doing just what you want to do. The hell with everybody else.
It was always just verbal. It was always just yelling. I think she was trying to control him, and he was just not going to be controlled.
Stop telling me what to do!
Callie may not have realized it, but she enabled her son every time she opened the door to him. Bad behavior was met with nagging, but also a hot meal and a place to sleep. Beatty knew he was dependent on his mom, but he resented her for it, and he resisted her control.
You could see that she was upset, but Tracy was her only son, and she loved him no matter what.
According to a police report, in March of 1992, Beatty and Callie had another huge blowout.
What had you been fighting about?
Me coming in late, she got pissed off because I came in at like 4:30 in the morning. Started screaming, if you're going to be staying here, you're going to have to have your ass in at such and such a time. I thought, I swear, I'm not no damn teenage kid anymore.
Callie was probably hard on Beatty because she wanted him to turn his life around. But once agitated, he couldn't reel himself back in. So she was playing a dangerous game of Russian roulette with him. The tension between them finally exploded into brutal violence.
The story that I heard from my grandmother was his parole officer was coming over and she wouldn't get up and clean the house up to his standards, which initiated the fight.
Pick up it!
You clean
This
up.
place looks like crap!
I lost it. I just completely lost it.
You trying to get me thrown back in jail?
Callie told family he threw hot coffee in her face and then nearly killed her with one punch.
When I hit her, she went down and hit the door on the cupboard, and it messed her up.
He beat her and put her into the hospital.
We already know his limbic system, which controls emotion, is likely impaired, perhaps from some combination of genetics and drug use. So his rage goes from 0 to 60 in a flash. After the attack, Callie pressed charges against her son, and Beatty was sent back to jail.
She was scared for her life. Pressing charges against him was probably the only way that she was able to protect herself from him, knowing that he would be incarcerated again.
Beatty was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and this time, he had to serve all of them.
And how did you feel about that?
Well, I was just pissed off. But she was all the time trying to get me sent back to prison.
He was obviously very angry with her to put him back in incarceration. He had a lot of time to sit there and be angry and dwell on it.
So even though it was his own fault he was back in jail, he blamed his mother. And as Beatty sat brooding in his cell, his anger grew. And when he was finally released, that rage would be unleashed with lethal consequences. I'm halfway through my interview with death row inmate Tracy Beatty, and from what I've heard so far, I'm beginning to think he'll never stop blaming his mother and take full responsibility for his crime.
Trying to get me thrown back in jail?
I've just learned that in 1992, when he was 31 years old, he hit his mother so hard she nearly died.
And your mom pressed charges against you.
Yeah,
So now you're back in jail. That had to make you mad.
yeah. I didn't see her for about 8 years.
Did your mother ever visit you?
She came down one time with my daughters. And it hurt me. I mean, they were right there, and I couldn't reach out and hold them.
So you love your girls?
Yeah.
Did you want to see your daughters?
That was the last time. I didn't want to see them. No, in prison no more.
This is the first time I've detected a glimmer of emotion in Beatty, but he seems to be fighting it. It shows me he's not completely devoid of feeling. He's just extremely low on empathy.
I don't think that he knows how to love someone. I don't.
During his decade in prison, Beatty's mean streak got worse. Department of Corrections records tell me that over the course of his incarceration, he was involved in 16 different incidents, including assaulting a prison guard.
He's beaten people up. He's beaten guards up. And I wouldn't be surprised if he is even killed on the inside. I guess he felt like he had nothing else to lose. He was already in there.
In prison, people are always controlling you, and Beatty hates that. He lashes out at the people who irritate him, like children, his mother, and now prison officials. Beatty got 3 additional years for his assault on the guard. And except for a few letters to his daughters, Beatty had no contact with anyone in his family for more than 10 years. On October 23, 2003, Beatty was finally due to be released on parole. Meanwhile, Callie was desperate for reconciliation with her son. I'd call this pathological altruism on Callie's part. She hoped against hope that she could save her son, but she ignored her own safety in the process.
My grandmother always wanted to have a relationship with him again, and the last thing she ever wanted to do was to make sure that she made amends with her only son. She told me she wrote a letter to his parole board to ask him to be paroled to her home. And I said, all right, have you lost your mind? Why in the world would you want him to come back here?
Oh, no, I'm okay. I'll be fine, really.
And her answer to me was, I have to. This is my last chance for us to have any kind of a mother-son relationship. She herself was not concerned about the anger that he had towards her.
Despite his seething resentment of his mother, Beatty moved back in with her because he had nowhere else to go.
How are things when you first get to your mother's house? Would you argue every day? When you were there, were you always arguing?
Not for the first 2 or 3 days, but after that, yeah.
They had some terrible fights, and it was awful. You know, it's just stupid disagreements, but it would just escalate into a screaming match between the two. He said, I just can't do anything right to please her. Maybe she was trying to make him into something that he was just never going to be. She might have been a petite lady. She was a scrapper. She was a fighter.
Callie was hell-bent on rehabilitating her son, but her tough love approach, on top of his humiliating dependence on her, was just stoking the fires of Beatty's rage. Beatty tells me he realized he made a mistake moving in with his mother.
Why did you think it was a mistake?
Because I knew she hadn't changed at all.
She hadn't changed. What do you mean?
She was still a bitch.
Did you hit your mom when you guys would fight? Would these fights escalate to physical violence?
No, because I usually walked out.
He'd just take off down the road, just stiff-legged and straight-backed and angry. And I think he was just putting some space between him and her.
I think Beatty tried to walk away because by this point he understood he had poor control over his impulses. He was back on parole and didn't want to go back to prison. Leanna, Callie's neighbor, was concerned that she wasn't safe with her son.
And he's a pretty scary-looking guy. He's got a tear tattoo, and he's pretty rough-looking. And I thought, whew.
To diffuse some of the tensions at home, she decided to offer Beatty some work around her yard.
I was kind of scared, but, you know, I felt like it was going to help my friend to get him out of the house. He mowed my yard, he cut some limbs, and did some stuff like that for me to give him some money so he could buy his own cigarettes. He didn't want his mom having to pay for his cigarettes. And he was always very respectful. I had a spare key for my house, so when he was doing yard work, he could go in the house and get himself water, something to eat, use the bathroom, whatever he needed to. You know, he proved himself trustworthy.
Beatty tells me that Leanna's efforts to intervene made his mother angry.
What happened?
I came in and she started bitching because I'd been over at Leanne's house. That's one of the things about her that people don't understand. Her and Leanne were like best friends before I paroled there. But she didn't want nothing to do with Leanne anymore. But she interfered. You know,
interfered in this?
Interfered in her control, you know. All she had to do was leave me the hell alone. But she wouldn't have it that way.
Leanna agrees that Callie seemed upset.
I don't know if she wanted to be the one to help him and resented me helping him. I don't know. I wish I knew. It definitely hurt our relationship. I left cards on her doorstep. I would call her and she wouldn't answer the phone when she knew that it was me.
As the weeks passed, Beatty started drinking and using meth again.
I think if my child were doing things, drinking and doing drugs and not doing what they were supposed to be doing, I would be on my child as well, too.
After a month of trying to set her son on the right path, Callie finally realized her efforts were hopeless. On November 25th, 2003,
I told you no!
The fighting got so bad, Callie told him he had to find a new place to live.
Drinking, now give me my keys!
She just couldn't take it anymore, and she was getting scared. She had had enough.
She had actually asked you to leave.
She told me I needed to find another place to stay. She wanted me out by the time I totally discharged my sentence on the 16th of December. She said, I don't want you here after that.
That's it. We're done. I don't want you in here anymore.
Did that make you mad at her?
I didn't plan on staying there long anyway.
So it didn't bother you that she kicked you out?
No.
Wait a minute. Beatty had nowhere to go. He had no money and no real job, and he was still on parole. He had to be furious about getting kicked out. In his mind, he'd been the good son, trying to restrain himself when she wound him up. Tamara was scared to death about how her father would react to her grandmother kicking him out.
No, really, I'm okay. I'll be okay. I'm fine, really.
I was very worried about her. I could tell by the tone of her voice that something wasn't right. My words to my grandmother was, he's probably going to kill you. And she said, Tamara, if that's what's supposed to happen, then it'll happen.
My time with death row inmate Tracy Beatty is running out, but I'm getting closer to discovering what drove this man to kill his mother, Callie, with his bare hands. I've learned he's been violent since childhood, and his anger issues have intensified over the years. And on November 25th, 2003, 2 days before Thanksgiving, he reached a breaking point when his mom gave him 3 weeks to find a new place to live. That afternoon, Beatty started drinking and then went to their neighbor Leanna's house.
When I got home from work, he was waiting on the front porch, same as always.
Leanna noticed nothing unusual about him. In fact, she invited him in and gave him something to eat.
We'd eat and watch that CSI and Law and Order until 10 o'clock. Then I would leave and she'd go to bed.
After he left to go home at 10 o'clock, I went in the kitchen and found the empty wine bottle sitting on the counter. I had no idea he had drank the whole bottle of wine.
Beatty tells me he barely opened the front door when his mother started in on him.
I'd been drinking all day. When I went in, I was drunk. And she started bitching and raising hell, you know, talking about I was kind of dope head and didn't give a damn about nobody but myself and all that. I didn't feel like hearing it. I told her I was fine. You know, you sit there and talk all you want to. I'm out of here. I'm going to the bedroom to lay down and go to sleep. Wait and talk to me about this crap tomorrow. You know I'm drunk. Wait till I'm sober, and then we'll talk about it.
Beatty was impulsive, drunk, and now his mother had taken away his only motive for self-restraint. Callie picked the worst possible time to poke this bear.
So did she kind of have it coming because she was poking at you?
I was just trying to get the hell out of the living room. That's how I intended to go to bed. She wouldn't have it that way.
You do belong here. Yeah.
Fuck off, you want. I'm out of here.
Walk away. You're good at taking it easy.
She jumped up and grabbed me by my hair. When she did that, I grabbed her by the throat, told her she didn't let me go. I was going to beat the hell out of her. Instead of letting me go, she kneed me in the nuts. And she did that. I know I just lost her.
This is the first time we've seen Callie get physical with him, and it triggered a new level of fury within Beatty.
What happened?
I strangled her.
Strangulation is a brutally intimate mode of killing. Literally squeezing the life from someone. When Beatty was done with her, Callie lay lifeless on the floor. He'd finally found a way to shut her up. Then he went to bed.
Do you think she's still alive?
Yeah. I went to bed and went to sleep. Next morning I woke up, went down the hallway, and she was still laying in the same place. I knew right then she was gone.
Were you upset?
Yeah. I mean, people, they don't realize what it's like. Man, I never intended to kill her.
This is another rare moment of emotion, so I'm going to follow this path and see if I can find any glimmer of remorse.
I couldn't believe I had done something like that. I didn't know I was capable of doing something that violent.
You clearly feel very strongly, you're emotional about this now.
Yeah, I wish, I'd give anything to go back to that night, and do something different.
Beatty's getting a little choked up here, but I can't tell if it's grief for his mother or the fact that he's now on death row.
So, were you still mad at your mom even after you killed her?
Yeah, I was just pissed off because I knew, she gonna get what she wanted, me back in prison, you know.
He's done an emotional 180. From a moment of possible remorse to now saying he thinks she goaded him into killing her just to put him back in jail. But Beatty's callous actions didn't end with murdering his mother.
What did you do then?
I undressed her and put her in the bathtub.
Why did you undress her?
Because she had blood all over her clothes. She stayed in the bathtub for 2 days.
And you left her in the bathtub for 2 days. And what were you doing then? What was the reason for that?
I had gotten a job.
So you think you need to go to work? You just murdered your mother and you're worried about your job?
I just went to, I mean, I went, kept going to work because, you know.
And are you thinking you can get away with it?
I don't know.
He's flustered here and caught off guard. His limited range of feeling is truly striking. It's as if it just occurred to him now that leaving his mother's dead body in a tub is the wrong thing to do.
You still have this problem that you have your mom in your house. Did you have a plan at this point about what you were going to do with the body?
I didn't know what to do. I knew I had to get her out of the bathtub.
What Beatty does with his mother's dead body would shock even some of the most depraved criminals I've talked to in my career.
First thing he thought was, how can I cover this up? Not how can I make this right, but how can I get away with this?
So far, death row inmate Tracy Beatty has shown no remorse for killing his own mother on November 25th, 2003. In fact, he still acts like she had it coming. He's just admitted to me that after strangling her, he went straight to work.
I had gotten a job with a construction crew building power lines up there. I kept going to work and make things look normal.
But he still had a big problem. What to do with the body he left to rot in the bathtub.
I didn't have any experience with that kind of thing, you know? So I didn't know what the hell to do.
So you didn't know what to do, so what did you do?
Dug a little shallow grave and put her in.
Beatty added cat litter and garlic to the grave to hide the odor and avoid detection.
How did you pick where you buried your mom? I mean, burying her at her house makes it more likely that she's going to be found.
Well, she had said all along that when she died that she wanted to be buried there on top of the little hill where her house was.
So you were honoring her wishes?
Yeah.
He's trying to convince me that this was some sort of tribute to his mother. But I think he dumped her body there because he didn't think anyone would look for her. Meanwhile, he went to a neighbor's house for Thanksgiving dinner.
Where's your mom? No, she's with her new boyfriend. She's okay.
Guests noticed Beatty was acting nervous when they asked after Callie.
Trey kept getting up and going to the door and looking out the door across the street, and then coming back, then sitting back down. He ate the meal, and then he was gone. He left in Callie's car. And we all knew something was up with that because she never let him drive her car, ever.
Hello?
Once I got the call from her neighbor saying that he was driving her car, I contacted Smith County myself to have someone investigate her as a missing person.
Meanwhile, Beatty was seen getting drunk and high with some junkie friends. Beatty used his mom's credit cards to fund his partying and maxed out Callie's accounts. As days passed and Callie didn't come home, Leanna was so alarmed she decided to see for herself.
I waited until Trey was gone one day, and I went to Callie's house and went in to look for any sign of any foul play. When I found little specks of blood all over the floor.
Leanna told police everything she learned. Police went looking for Beatty. On the morning of December 19, they found him outside a cousin's house, asleep in a stolen truck.
And I woke up with a guy on the other side of the window looking at me with a gun, and then I'm like, uh-oh. get out, show me your hand, put your hands up, keep your hands visible and all this crap.
Did you know right then what they were there for?
Yeah, I kind of figured that.
While in custody, Beatty didn't confess or reveal the location of his mother's body. In fact, he made a desperate last-ditch effort to avoid getting charged by making up stories to explain her disappearance. In many of them, he said a man named Junior had killed his mother.
You said that Junior killed your mom, and then you killed him.
I told him that I dumped the bodies in Cedar Creek Lake. I figured, they can't find the bodies.
And then another story where Junior buried your mom, and then you killed Junior and threw his body in the lake.
Yeah. And I don't know. I was so drunk I couldn't keep everything together.
So these are just stories coming out of
because you were drunk. Out of nowhere.
These drunken stories offer a clear window into how Beatty's mind works. Violence is so natural to him, he tries to cover up a murder with another murder. I think Beatty told these stories for two reasons. One, he wanted to blame someone else for the murder so he wouldn't have to take responsibility. And two, it bought him more time while he sent police on a wild goose chase. With little evidence, Beatty was released while police looked for proof of his guilt.
I think that he knew at some point that he was going to get caught. I think more so he probably wanted to have as much time out and free as he possibly could before he got caught.
For 5 days, authorities searched for Callie and Junior, Beatty's made-up killer. They used cadaver dogs and searched local lakes where Beatty claimed he had hidden his mother and Junior's bodies. But he couldn't keep up with all the holes in his chaotic lies under police questioning. On December 23, 2003, nearly a month after he killed his mother, Beatty finally cracked and told detectives where her body was.
Let's close up the area. We're going to need additional units up here.
It was December 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve. I received a call from Smith County. They had found my grandmother's remains in a shallow grave next to her mobile home. I hit my knees and started crying.
I did not believe that he was capable of killing his mother. I never dreamed that he would go that far.
On December 30th, 2003, Beatty was charged with capital murder. The jury found him guilty and sentenced him to die by lethal injection. I don't think this murder was planned, but Beatty committed a shocking crime, betraying the first and most fundamental human attachment to our mothers.
Do you think this is where you belong?
No.
Where do you think you belong? Do you think you belong in prison?
Yeah, I'm doing something like I did.
Yeah.
I have to accept responsibility for it,
Right.
Don't do the crime if you can't do the time,
Beatty has exhausted all of his state appeals, and in 2014, he was denied a federal appeal. His execution date is likely to be set very soon.
Do you want to stay at execution, or are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm sick of this. Sick of being locked up, locked down. I mean, sitting there in a little thing like 8-foot by 10-foot cell, 23 hours a day.
Beatty holds neither his mother's life nor his own in any special regard. Sadly, I don't think Beatty will ever recognize the person he took from those who loved her.
She has 6 amazing great-grandchildren now that I know that she would be more than thrilled to be around, that she's missing out on. She was a remarkable lady, she was very strong.
She had the biggest heart of anyone. I don't have any doubt that she loved him, and I have no doubt that she would forgive him tomorrow. She was that kind of person.
It's been years since Beatty's seen or heard from his daughters. But now, Tamara says she plans to go see her father one last time. At his execution.
I would like for my face to be one of the last faces that he sees. I am glad that he got the death penalty, and I feel like justice has been served once he is executed. Do I have mixed emotions about my father being put to death? Yes. I just hope that he has somehow found God and asked for forgiveness. I'm sorry that he did what he did, and I do love him and I forgive him. And that's it.
Your daughter wants to be at your execution. Did you know that?
Which one?
It's Tamara. How do you feel about her wanting to be there?
If she feels like it's necessary for her to have closure, then, you know, I ain't got no problem with it.
Thank you, Mr. Beatty. I appreciate you doing this.
All right, thank you.
As I wrap up this interview, I recognize it's easy to get a confession of murder from someone who has no value for human life. When it comes to the brain, all men are not created equal. I believe Beatty was a bad seed, born with the psychological deficits he couldn't overcome. He's incapable of processing the emotions or controlling the impulses that have driven him to violence